I call the member for Ballina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move that on this... I'll start again. I move that this House, 1, recognises that 8 to the 15th of November 2020 marked NAIDOC Week across Australia. 2, acknowledges NAIDOC Week celebrates Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and cultures, the first peoples of this continent and oldest living cultures in the world. 3, congratulates the Arakwal-Bumbalin community and Bunyarra collective for their excellent art exhibition on Sunday, 8 November 2020, that I was privileged to formally open, featuring 19 artists from across the Bundjalung area. And 4, recognises the dedication of curator and native title holder Nicola Clark and Ellie Davidson and the support of Mullumbimby District Neighbourhood Centre. I'm very privileged to introduce this motion, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which the Parliament sits, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also recognising the Arakwal people of the Byron Bay area, of who I'm speaking about today from the Bundjalung Nation. It is, as I say, my absolute privilege to introduce this motion to the Legislative Assembly and to seek support from it from all members in this place. The Arakwal-Bumbalin people are the native title holders of Byron Bay, and it was absolutely momentous for my community in 2019 that this chamber, that all members unanimously supported a motion to recognise then under colonial law that they were native title, they become native title holders of the Byron Bay area. They and the Bundjalung people have lived and cared for their country for more than 60,000 years. The Bunyarra Collective specifically is a local expression of Bundjalung traditional and contemporary Aboriginal dance, music and painting, and promotes and supports leadership and confidence amongst Aboriginal youth and the broader community. With the permission of the traditional custodians today, I can inform the House that the Bundjalung meaning of Bunyarra is more than good. I want to congratulate the Bunyarra Collective on the amazing events they hosted during NAIDOC Week last year and the superb art exhibition that I was privileged to formally open in the Bangalow A&I Hall. The event saw the exhibition of Bundjalung artists from across the region and was sensational, and the leadership of Arakwal custodians Nicola Clark and Ellie Davidson cannot be overstated. Young women in the early 20s, as artists and curators, they put on an absolute world-class event. And I also want to thank and recognise the support given to them by the Mullumbimby District Neighbourhood Centre, who you've heard me mention many times in this place, because they continue time and time again to rise and support our communities through thick and thin. Mr Speaker, as we know, the acronym NAIDOC stands for National Aborigines and Islanders Day Observance Committee. The history of NAIDOC traces back from Aboriginal activism since invasion. We know that in the 20s, Aboriginal rights groups boycotted Australia Day in protests against the status and treatment of Indigenous Australians. And this went through in the 30s and 40s with the National Day of Mourning, which was held annually on the Sunday before Australia Day and was known as Aborigines Day. In 1955, this was shifted to the first Sunday in July, and it was decided by Aboriginal people that the day should become not simply a protest, but a celebration. And then in the 1950s, major Aboriginal organisations, state and federal governments and a number of church groups supported the formation of a formal body known as the National Aborigines Day Observance Committee. Today, and in the last 60 years, this has become the title for the whole week, not just for a day. A theme is chosen, as we know, each year to reflect the important issues and events. And in the last 60 years, and with significant moments towards reconciliation, including the reconciliation walk across the Sydney Harbour Bridge here in Sydney, the Commonwealth Government's apology to the stolen generations, and indeed the inquiry, the Upper House inquiry into the impacts of the stolen generation, chaired by former Greens MLC and dear friend Jan Barham, NAIDOC today recognises both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and cultures. Mr Speaker, in 2020 the theme for NAIDOC Week was, always will be. It was the recognition that First Nations people have occupied and cared for this continent for over 65,000 years. Mr Speaker, we know that we are still many, many miles away from redressing the injustices of the past. The Greens and so many people in my community, I'm very pleased to see members here who are absolute champions on the need for change, but we want to see the date for Australia Day changed to celebrate modern history on a day that is not Invasion Day. It is pleasing to see in my area that both my councils have resolved to change the date. Out of the 2017 National Constitutional Convention, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people coming from all points of the southern sky made the Uluru Statement from the heart. And that statement is an invitation to the people of Australia to work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to see fundamental changes in the relationship between colonial Australia and our First Nations people. Treaties delivered, constitutional recognition, and voice and truth-telling and restorative justice. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes were the first sovereign nations of the Australian continent and its adjacent islands, and possessed it under their own laws and customs. Ownership was never ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. With substantive constitutional change and structural reform, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people believe that this ancient sovereignty can shine through as a fuller expression of Australians' nationhood. Intergenerational trauma and dispossession exist and have existed since colonial invasion, and the Uluru Statement calls for fundamental change. A Makarrata Commission to develop a national framework to negotiate respective treaties in each state and territory. Constitutional reforms to empower Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to enable them to take their rightful place in their own country, and the establishment of a First Nations voice enshrined in the Constitution. And truth-telling processes and restorative justice processes that expose the full history of this continent. Mr Speaker, I look forward to hearing from my colleagues, the member for Balmain and the member for Newtown, as well as government speakers on this important motion and NAIDOC Week 2020.
I thank the member for Ballina.